Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. It is season 4 of NiCHE Conversations, and this is a place where I ask authors on NiCHE to reiterate their ideas, to connect their ideas to broader fields of study or to current events. I ask them to talk about their personal relationship to the research, and I can't believe it's season 4 already, and I have something like 56 interviews under my belt from the first 3 seasons, which is really, really cool. And today we are going to be joined by Andi Schwartz, who is known for their work in Femme studies, among other things, and this is really exciting for me. I've worked with Andi in the past with our feminist digital methods research cluster and conference, the initial conference that Sarah York Bertram and I founded. We did that closely with Andi while they were at the York Center for Feminist Research. Andi has joined us, so I'm going to invite her in. There we go. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you doing? You survived the hurricane?
I did, yes. It didn't actually hit where I am, so we had a little power outage, but relatively fine. It's back to being sunny and warm where I am, so
Good. Yeah. Yes, because viewers, we were worried that we may we'd have to postpone this because there was a hurricane rolling through Nova Scotia this weekend, but here we are. So welcome to NiCHE Conversations. I am Jessica DeWitt, and I'm one of the editors here at the Network in Canadian History and Environment. And today we are joined by Andi Schwartz. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Andi Schwartz. My pronouns are she and her. What can I say about myself? I would do a lot of work around Femme in both academic forms and in like more kind of public forms. Like I do zines and more public writing around Femme too. This is one of my like central obsessions in life. Yeah, so I'm currently in Nova Scotia, as we talked about. I'm teaching this year at St. Francis Xavier University, so I'm quite far from home. So it's kind of funny to be having this conversation in this context. I'm so far from like where I'm from, but also really missing like being back home.
Yeah.
And a lot, missing my dogs quite a bit. So that's like another like about me thing, is I'm dog mom. That's like very central too. It used to be central to my day to day, but it's like really central to who I am. So, I think that's the key points. Of introduction.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and Andi and I have known each other kind of professionally a bit for the last couple years. And as I was mentioning, we've worked on the Feminist Digital Methods Conference and the research cluster together. Also, I was just realizing that one of your covers to one of your Femme zines is on my wall, my Femme print wall.
Oh my gosh, yes, so, the Camp Femme, I see.
Yes. Amazing. I just realized that. I was like, oh, you're always here. No. But so I identify as Femme viewers, so I have a Femme print wall that's what's always behind me in these videos. So today I invited Andi to join us to talk about a piece that she wrote for the Emotional Ecologies series that Sarah York Bertram and I edited this past summer, I guess. And the piece was called Time Traveling with My Dad, Searching for Femme Roots in Rural Ontario. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And first off, I wanted to just talk about this landscape, this home landscape that you described in this piece. So, can you describe this landscape and what is your current relationship to it?
Yeah. So I like to start by, so the colonial name for where I'm from is Portland, Ontario. And
Mhm.
usually I pause for laughter because every time I tell somebody the name of the place I'm from, they say, I'm sorry, what? So that's what it's called. It's named after um, an English estate, like an estate in England that was called Portland House, which I've never been to. I have no idea beyond the name, the connection really,
Mhm.
but there it is. But so I grew up, I spent like all of the 90s there. Um, and my dad, like I said, talk about in the piece, my dad lived there his whole life. His mother lived there her whole life. Um, it so it even when I was there, it was really still a lot of farmland. So lots of
Mhm.
like big rolling fields, hills. You could always see cows and horses, like, grazing or whatever they're doing when you're driving. But it's also like interesting, kind of the road that like my house was off was like a major highway. Like it was like an 80-kilometer highway. So you had, it was pretty dangerous actually. So we were only allowed to play in certain parts of the property because like it was, you know,
Mhm.
yeah, like so it's between, maybe it helps if people who know Ontario. It's between like Guelph and Hamilton. So it's really like Hamilton's also very like industrial. So there's like lots of trucks going by and it's like just a major commuter route. And my dad was a plumber, so like my particular landscape, like the property that like we lived on was also like um had all like was also like, yeah, like a big piece of land, but also had like all of this like plumbing equipment like on the lawn that we
Mhm.
played on. So it's kind of this interesting mix of like natural beauty and like also like this very human machinery industrial area.
Mhm.
And I think like there now like kind of central in the area is the like Nestle water plant, which used to be called the Aberfoyle Springs, that was bought by Nestle. So yeah, so it's kind of this interesting rural industrial kind of
Mhm.
landscape. And I first, like I moved away first from Portland in 2001 when my parents split up. And so we moved into town, which was Guelph that time. And so now, yeah, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like have not, I used to go back more, but my dad no longer lives there. And sort of like as I visited, more and more pieces of like my childhood landscape have like disappeared over time. So like my grandfather's barn was taken down, which was like pretty emotional, honestly. And even the house that I grew up in, I was talking about this highway. So it was actually the house and the land was purchased by the township and bulldozed so they could expand the highway. So the
Mhm.
place where like I'm from, that I grew up, spent like most like the first, 10, 11 years of my childhood is actually not there anymore. And it's kind of feels like when I drive by there, there's like this sort of like empty, haunted, sort of eerie
Mhm.
feeling. So my relationship to it now is actually a bit sad in a way, but also it was really special to me. So I think as I explore in my writing, it like continues to hold a special place. And, I'm also trying to think about it not idealistically, but like
Mhm.
kind of giving it this like kind of trying to attend to the complications of it all. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And as I wrote in when I picked it for my editor's pick for July, I think, um, I appreciated it because I resonated a lot with this idea of being like feeling deeply connected to a landscape, but also completely alienated from it. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
like definitely part of the past, right? Like you don't belong there anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's you, but also it's like not you at all anymore, right? I haven't been back. I grew up in rural northwestern Pennsylvania, so not actually that far from where you grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't been back in like 7 years, but like yeah, it just has this very, there's a lot of grief. There's a lot of grief around it. And the specific place I grew up is, very different from, I'm even scared to see the house that I grew up in. Like,
Yeah.
I'm scared to see how people are like using it. And yeah, anyways. Yeah, so there's I think a lot of us have that feeling with our childhood home landscapes.
Yeah.
So I think that's like a very a universal thing that people can hook on to in this piece. Yeah, so this piece intertwines like your reflections and writing on this home landscape with the story of Anna Jameson, who is a fairly well-known Canadian figure in Canadian history. But the twist in this one is that you're connecting it to queer history, right? And to queerness and to femness. Yeah. So I wanted, if you could talk about how you see Anna Jameson fitting into a queer history of Canada.
I hope this doesn't upset anybody, but also if it does, I don't know. But yeah, so in my imagination, Anna Jameson is queer. But also in the subtext of her writing, Anna Jameson is queer. Like, so I'm not a historian. I actually haven't studied like a lot of Canadian literature, like much, like a little bit, but so I'm actually like fairly new to Anna Jameson, and I found Anna Jameson through another scholar that I cite in the piece, whose name is escaping me right now, but talking about like Indigenous and British literary traditions and exchanges was sort of the anyways, that was the approach through which I found Anna Jameson. And so so as you said, like she's like pretty well-known writer. So she's not Canadian, she's like a British writer, but she spent some time in Canada when it was called like Upper Canada, I guess, Upper and Lower Canada, in like 1836, 7, around there. And she documented her travels, and like that's why I think why she's really well known is that she published her like travel diaries in this book. It has a great name, Winter Studies and Summer Rambles in Canada, I think is what it's called. But I got so interested in her because she was, at that time she was previously like an educator, like she was like a governess, and I don't know if she actually like taught in like kind of a school thing, but she was an educator, and she supported her family. I think she had like 4 sisters or something, and she supported them and her parents through this sort of teaching and writing. She actually wrote a lot about Shakespeare. Anyway, she did a lot of literary criticism as well as the travel stuff. But what what was first interesting to me was like that she, I think it was Sir Francis Bondhead, I believe, was like the governor of Upper Canada at the time. I forget, but they hated each other. They had a really antagonistic like relationship, and it's like kind of documented in their letters to other people. And I just thought it was so funny how I think it was that guy, Sir Francis Bondhead. I'm pretty sure. I'll have to double check my facts, but he thought she wasn't a suitable wife. He couldn't believe that she wanted to have like literary salons instead of like be the society wife person. Like she just really like, in his view, like challenged sort of the standards of like what like women should be like of that class anyways at that time. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And so then I started reading about her a little bit more, and I don't think she got married until she was in her 30s or something. And for the time period, I thought, well, that's pretty late. I wonder what's going on there. And I just found a little bit more that like she had been engaged to this guy, the Jameson, who was like, he was a government, I forget his role. This is so bad. He was like a government, like he was like employed by the British government, but he was stationed in Upper Canada and some other places. And so they had broken off their engagement because she got the chance to go to Europe, and she was like, I think I'd rather do that than get married, which seemed very gay to me. And then, didn't get married until she was 31, seemed a little gay. And then like her biographers like recount all of these like deep, passionate relationships, friendships that she had with women throughout her whole life. And her like relationship with her husband was never that. They actually ended up getting a divorce, or as close to a divorce as you could in those times. And so that's when I started thinking like there's some queer subtext here, like the friendships, the disinterest in marriage, the kind of like general political like rebellion, like sort of like rebellion against like normative roles and stuff like that. Yeah, and she was like really celebrated by feminist historians, as many kind of like white settler writers were and are. So anyway, she's often understood as like this feminist character, but there's also a lot of like more critical perspectives, including feminist perspectives, but like indigenous perspectives on Anna Jameson's writing and her own embellishments and her own like embellishments on what she achieved by like kind of leaving out the fact that actually it was like she benefited from like many indigenous people from different nations really looking out for her and taking care of her, as many white settler women did, like early in Canada's history. So that's Anna Jameson, and I have no proof that she's queer, just feelings.
Hey, I mean, that's a lot of what we go with when we're looking back, right? So
yes,
I think you present a strong argument. So, and perhaps articles like this will just spark someone else to really deep dive into the subject. So
and she was also like writing around the same time as Anne Lister. Do you know like Anne Lister in England?
Yeah.
She was like Gentleman Jack. So, and the thing is about Anne Lister is like a lot of her diaries, she actually wrote in the crypt hand famously, like she wrote in code so they couldn't be deciphered, but people worked at it and they deciphered it. And but like some of her Anne Lister's descendants like actually hid her diaries because they were like pretty graphic, or like not graphic, but explicit about like about her like what we would call like lesbian relationships, right? And then even when they were initially first published, they left out those parts.
Yeah.
But it's more recently that like someone, I forget who, I can look it up though, and that was like, actually this is a really significant part of the Anne Lister story and needs to be included. So it is possible. Further digging, we can find more information.
No, it's great. I loved it. I love that part of the piece. And so this was a piece written on a prompt related to emotional ecologies, but I thought we could wrap up today by talking about how it kind of fits more into your broader field of like body of work and what you do normally.
What I do normally.
Yeah.
Well, so the piece is like, it's all about Anna Jameson, but it's also about me and like where I'm from. And, as I said, like kind of earlier on, like one of my central like obsessions in life is Femme, identity, community, culture, history, anything really about Femme. And so and to me, like it's personal, like it is what I do academically as well, but it is also personal. And I don't think that those two things are necessarily separate. But one of the ways that I've like really, worked with this idea of Femme is through like sort of life writing, reflecting on my experiences. And so for me personally, just because of like how I grew up and all of that, like, my specific social location and all, and constellation of identities, like rural Ontario really is a huge shaping force in how I became femme. So it fits in that way. But then I also talked about how I'm trying to like regard this place, like attend to like the complexities. So even though I have like a lot of like nostalgic and idealistic, warm, fuzzy feelings about where I came from, I also know and have been trying to like pay more attention to like its colonial, like settler colonial history in the place, and like my own family's role and complicity, I suppose, in actively turning this place into a place that's named after a British house, and it's predominantly white and settled in all these ways. So this is sort of like a direction I'm taking my Femme scholarship to. And I also talk about this in the piece a little bit, that I think like queer people of all kinds, but certainly queer femmes, we like disavow like norms of femininity, right? Especially, we do. And we create like new things. Like femme is a remade, own separate identity, but there's also the very fact of like me, I can claim femme identity, but there's also like the very fact of like my white settler body still moves through the world in these particular ways and means certain things, changes spaces based on that reality. So even though I want to claim that like femme is doing something different or is something different than femininity, there's also these other things wrapped up in it. And so I'm really interested in kind of attending to that and thinking through that. And I think there's like this other framework I use that's not just about femme, but about critical femininities, is also really important for attending to those subtleties. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm sort of trying to fit it into this way of like examining femme and cultures of femininity, feminist femininity, for example, that's not necessarily queer, but in addition to queer femininities, but also like through while paying attention to like the reality of settler colonialism, the reality of whiteness and white supremacy, and how these things are still part of our identities, whether we are comfortable with it or not. So some of the other stuff I've been doing, like I've really been looking at the TV show Outlander. Do you know that one?
I do, yes.
Yeah, so that's another way I've been like looking through white settler femininity. So the protagonist of that show, Claire, also celebrated as like a feminist figure similar to Anna Jameson. And I just think it's interesting the ways in which these celebrations get taken up and by who. Yeah, so that's sort of like where I'm going with it, and this was sort of like like kind of a step towards that kind of work, thinking more critically. Like personally, I think it's important for like my own personal praxis as a feminist, human, queer person to think about these questions, but also like that's like where I'm moving to, and what sort of the field of critical femininities and femme theory is trying to bridge those conversations, even though they're hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's got me reeling and thinking, like how I identify as a queer femme, but because of the way I look and the fact that I have cis male partners and I have a baby, and like I can move through the world without people ever even thinking that I'm queer, right? And that's a very different way of being that other queer people experience. And also thinking, I often think about how I am an immigrant in Canada, but everyone assumes I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
And what does that say about that, right? Whereas there's people who have been here for generations, they're assumed to not be Canadian. And that's very racially, I think about that a lot, how I move very easily through, like, as an immigrant in this country, because I am a white you know, sometimes straight presenting
Yeah.
individual. Yeah, and how things are easier for me in that way. So those are kind of some of the things that were coming up for me personally as you were talking. Yeah. Oh, that sounds interesting. It's so good. And like, it's such a challenge to like, and it's something that like I think about all the time. You know, we as academics we learn all these highfalutin theories and
Yeah.
stuff, but like who gives a damn if we're not applying it to like critically thinking about ourselves and our communities and making a change in the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like, yeah, really fundamental to how I approach femme theory in general is
Mm-hmm.
that it's, I think that's like, you know, that's not invented by me, not by a long shot, right? That's like a feminist tradition going back many, many, you know, decades of feminist thought, right? Is the intersection of like personal and political, obviously, and but yeah, I think the way that I was initially thought about like taught, sorry, the way I was initially taught about femme theory was that it's often been through memoir, it's been through life writing, it's been through art and other kinds of cultural productions that we like produce meaning and produce communities and culture about femme.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of like a commitment that I like, that it like, you know, I try to maintain and like in all my work, through, you know, like the Critical Femininities Conference we do always invites like kind of like more like varied approaches. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think whether or not like I also just like have always been interested in like more creative forms of writing. So it's really awesome to be able to do like some like creative nonfiction for like, you know, this issue that kind of brings together some of like the things like you said, like we're thinking about in this very theoretical way, but then like giving them this sort of like staple it to reality a little bit, right? I think it's really useful and it's like really, yeah, fundamental to like how I want to approach femme theory, feminist theory, queer theory,
Yeah.
all of those.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for joining me today, Andi.
Thank you for
I highly
having me.
recommend. I highly recommend everyone check out this piece. Time traveling with my dad, or you can just like put "femme" into the search bar, and it's one of the first things that'll come up on our niche
Yay.
site. Yeah, it's a wonderful piece, and there's a reason I chose it for my editor's pick.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Andi, you just have like you do have a really wonderful knack for creative nonfiction, and I commend you for it.
Oh, thank you. Well, I really appreciated the opportunity you and Sarah created to do something like that. That still sort of speaks to, you know, the whole body of my work, including personal essays, theory, all of this stuff. So yeah, it's really, really wonderful prompt. And so I was so happy to be part of the issue.
Awesome. Okay, well, I will bid you adieu for the day. Thanks for joining me. Take care, Andi.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.